Am I on?
Yeah, you're on.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We are going to get started with our 11 a.m. session, and that will be led by Brother Jovan Paez. He's going to be talking about the power of presence, and so we just encourage you to not only to listen closely and grab the wisdom from his message, but also would be prepared to ask any questions you have after.
All right. Glad you guys are here. Glad we can have these streamed as well. The idea of the power of presence is really a biblical one. When I was thinking about what is one of the most important things that we can talk about in leadership, and earlier Cliff mentioned different leadership books, and he had mentioned different leaders who write on leadership, and one was John Maxwell. There's something that he said, and I started reading some of his books several years ago, and one of the things that, whether he came up with it or not, but he's framed it pretty well, pretty succinctly. He said, without influence, you will never be able to lead. Now, everyone can be a leader, whether or not you're in a leadership role. But without influence, you'll never be able to lead. And how do you balance that? Some say, I don't want to be a leader. Well, you can't ignore your influence. And by your influence, you show a path. By your actions, you not only show a path, but you lead in that direction. So if it's indecision, guess what? You're a leader of indecision. You have shown how to live out indecision. If you are a person who likes to ride the fence, guess what? You are a leader. You are showing some influence by your decision, because that will impact someone else by riding the fence. Years ago, basketball player Charles Barkley got into a little bit of controversy because he was known as a bad boy, kind of in the basketball world, rough, gruff, kind of a bull, though not on the Bulls. And he was asked about his brash behavior, people wondering if he was worried about his influence. He said, I'm no, hero. I'm a basketball player. And so he felt that he was justified in not being worried about his behavior on the court. Even years later, he doubled down in interviews, but he's tried to explain himself a little better. For example, when using the word hero, Charles Barkley had the idea of soldier, fireman, policeman, people who actually risk their life for the benefit of society. And he said, I just play ball. I play in a safe space with a basketball, and I make a lot of money. I don't sacrifice my body. I don't risk my life for the benefit of society. So I'm not a hero. But what he, I think, has somewhat accepted, but somewhat has dismissed is, nevertheless, all eyes are on him in the arena of the sport he's in. And his behavior, whether he likes it or not, has influence. And because he was a successful basketball player, almost won a title, he has the appearance of an athletic superstar or an athletic hero. I think we need to appreciate that whatever role we have, whatever place we are in society, whether it is a genuine at risk for the benefit of society job or maybe less than, we have influence of some kind. And because of that, we influence and we have a presence that affects others. So yes, it may be true that without influence, you will never be able to lead. Maybe we might say it this way: lead with purpose. Maybe your influence will not help you lead with purpose, but you have influence nonetheless. This is a basic principle of life. We see this basic principle in life as well in the presence of God. We are constantly bombarded by the presence of God through his actions and through his deeds and through his creation. When we wake up, when we look in the mirror, when we see things broken, we wonder where he is. We're wondering where his presence is. We're wondering where his power is. We're either seeing it or asking for it. Because God is a leader. He leads our souls. He gave us the Bible. He has given us prophets and apostles and Jesus to lead us with his presence to the direction of godliness, holiness, and sanctification. So this is extremely important of a principle when we talk about male spiritual leadership. Our presence in the life of the people we love or love less, our presence in the life of our family, our presence in the life of the church, our presence in our own lives and in the decisions we make, purposeful or not. There's just no way around it. Presence is powerful. Presence is power of accepting the choices in front of you and making a decision to strengthen your life, to strengthen the lives of others, or protect them. And that's something God does. So when we think about, for example, being made in the image of God, Genesis 1, 26, 27, when we think about what that means, at least one of those things has to include that we are relational beings with the power of influence by our presence. And when we pull our presence away, we're making a conscious decision, perhaps, to lead negatively. God has done an interesting thing. It's what philosophers call an epistemic distance. He is close enough, we can detect him by the things that have been made, we can detect him in the things we see, but he's still far away enough where what we kind of detect is not so overwhelming that we are so fully compelled to obey him apart from a free will choice. He's in this sweet spot that allows us to be free to make choices while acknowledging there's something greater than I am. As humans, we don't have the luxury to kind of vanish. We don't have that luxury. We can say, oh, I can go to a cave, I can hop in my car, I can go to the beach, I can escape. No, you've just escaped certain people, certain locations for a certain period of time. You really haven't escaped anything. You've just gone somewhere else to bring your presence and influence there. That's all you've done. You've shifted yourself. And so, my first point I want to just suggest, we need to take presence seriously. Specifically as Christians, specifically as spiritually minded people. Male leaders in the church are to be influential. We're called to be influential. I could cite at least 12 verses. 1 Peter 3:7. Husbands are supposed to dwell their wives according to knowledge, treating her as if she were the weaker vessel. That means showing her respect and dignity and comfort. That your prayers be not hindered. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 25 to 33 show that a husband is supposed to show his wife the kind of allegiance and love that would be willing to sacrifice himself, his comforts, his own position, maybe even die for her, just like Jesus died and loved and gave his life for the church. In Ephesians 6:4, after speaking to children and quoting in the Exodus, to honor your father and your mother. This is the first commandment that came with a promise. You may live long on the earth. Paul mentions that fathers have a role, and we must not use it so negatively that we burden our children with negativity and overly riding them. But we need to find a way to make a balance of our presence with our children, nurturing them in the Lord while showing discipline. Colossians 3:19 through 21, a similar challenge is given. But in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 4 and 5 and 12, both the overseers and those who would be appointed servants, deacons, have a responsibility to raise up children. Even in Titus 1:6, how they lead at home and the influence and presence they have at the home will directly affect their ability to lead in the church. And so all of these areas, whether it's marital faithfulness, personal faithfulness to your spouse, responsibility as a father to their children, being involved. In fact, in 1 Timothy, you have this word where the father is actually standing next to them, raising them up. It's an idea of helping your children stand. In other words, there's no room for either a floater husband or a floater dad. You have to be involved. You have to get your hands dirty. If your children are difficult, unfortunately, that's the terrain of your parenthood. If your children are relatively easy, you have different issues, nonetheless. But you have to get your hands dirty. Parents, dads need to show their knuckles raw from working with their kids. Whether you want to use the illustration of an ice sculptor or you want to use a woodworker or a metal worker, it really doesn't matter. Because in every field we work in, we end up smelling like it. We end up being cut by it. We end up being bruised by it. But the idea is what we work on, we lift up to present and allow to move. So as male leaders who are spiritually minded, who trust God, who want to follow God, there's no escape hatch for us without not just failing, but leading with our presence to influence our children in another way that will probably hurt them, corrupt them, and add to the problems in the world. You know, I try to suspend judgment on the strength of surveys, but I read a survey not too long ago where it contrasted the influence of mothers and fathers in the home. And I found this fascinating, and I'm sorry it's the day before Mother's Day, but just hear me out. The study compared the difference of influence of a mother and a father. And of course, there could be husbands and mothers in the house, mother only, father only. Statistically speaking, children were better off if it was, of course, mother and father. And what do you think it was when it was between mother only and father only? Children were better off when they had their father in their life rather than their mother. For me, that was very interesting because the court system, for example, always leans toward who? The mother in custody cases. I found that really fascinating. Now, with surveys, you know, a couple of years later, you can have another survey to compete it and contest it, but I do want to at least point this out. There is a growing body of material, sociologically and legally, where the idea of the lack of influence of the father in the child's life is truly coming on to its own as a principle that needs to be addressed, because when a father is in the lives of their children, their presence, their influence, even if they're not the best father, the children have a better chance of thriving. I'm hearing more and more cases. I have a lot of I have a lot of dads who are single parent dads, and they have to go to custody cases, and they keep hearing more and more cases of fathers getting their children because of things like that. But unfortunately, it's sad that we so have culturally put the father at the perimeter of raising children. Whether it is we overwork our dads, we overwork our men, or we infantilize our men by keeping them forever perpetual boys. And sometimes we seek an escape. And sometimes, someone might say, well, doesn't the Bible say it's better to be out of the house than in a house that's always fighting? I don't want to always be around my wife when I'm arguing with her. Doesn't the Bible say that? Yeah, Proverbs 21:9 tells us better to be in a corner in the roof than in the house with a contentious woman. But that's a really sad misapplication of that verse. Proverbs is not the best place to find ironclad teaching. They're general principles. And when you actually read it in context, you have to appreciate that there is a sense in which this whole idea of better than, this is better than that, is just to show you strategy. It's just to show you temporary appreciation. Yeah, it's better to take a moment to be on the roof than to be in the house where there's a lot of fighting. Sure. But that is not, when you read the whole book of Proverbs, what wisdom teaches. Wisdom does not teach us to stay away, but to get involved. Wisdom teaches us the influence of godliness, the influence of wisdom, the influence of practical godliness is essential for the strengthening of the home. In other words, presence is power. Lack of presence is power in the other direction. And when your presence brings the influence of wisdom, the influence of discipline, the influence of consistency, the wisdom of, or the influence and presence of someone seeking to do better and be better, because we're called by God to work out our salvation in fear and trembling. That visual is powerful. And we have to take that into consideration. We're too comfortable, I believe. We're too comfortable waiting for someone else to give us answers. We're too comfortable hearing that men are bad. We've got comfortable hearing that masculinity is wrong. We got too comfortable in our society, and we have this tendency to have quiet men. I'm not talking about rowdy men. I'm not even talking about bullish men, apish men. I'm not asking us to be that. God doesn't ask us to be that. But if I learn anything from Proverbs 1-9, is that we are supposed to shape your own personal life first. I love Brandon's talks on Leader of One. That's right there in Proverbs. You have to take on wisdom and instruction, and you have to be willing to be a student in order to lead yourself to make the right choices. It starts there, your relationship with God. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The fools hate wisdom, Proverbs 1:7. But the very next verse says, my son, listen to your father's instruction and listen to your mother's wisdom. Chapter 2, verse 1, chapter 3, verse 1, chapter 5, verse 1, chapter 6, verse 1, chapter 7, verse 1, all ask the son to listen to his father. And as the son listens, he slowly develops into a man of integrity, a spiritually minded person who will then also have a chance to be a leader and influencer in his family's life and then in society. So when you think of Proverbs, you need to think of it as this sort of three circles. Me and God. And then this next circle. Me and my family, my close ones, me and society, as an emerging spiritual leader, bringing influence to do the right thing in a world that often asks me to do the wrong thing. In other words, when you read Proverbs 1-9, those chapters, you begin to see the ever-present influence of the man's father as a counselor, as his wisdom giver. To put it in more sci-fi modern terms, the man's dad should be his Obi-Wan Kenobi. He should be his Yoda, who can give him wisdom and instruction from years of experience of going through this process himself. We've lost that in our society. We've been taught fathers are idiots. Disney's done a good job on that. Every kid show in the 2000s, every dad was an idiot. I remember growing up, for example, Not the best show, wasn't like the most important television show of all time, but I love the show Who's the Boss? And at least, even though this guy was like the maid of the house, he was a dad. And he was maybe kind of high strung, but he was involved in his daughter's life. And she looked up to him. I remember when the media appreciated that important principle. Over the last 20, 30 years, kids are always smarter than their dads. Sisters are always brighter and smarter than their brothers. There's a subtle suggestion that men have no influence, no value, and it has reached epic proportions, I believe. And we need to go back to the Bible and appreciate the role of influence and power of presence. Dads need to get involved in their kids' lives. Husbands need to be involved in their wives' lives. After all, when we became one, we decided that we would be one. And I love this phrase. I don't know if it's original with him, but in his book on the unfaithful bride of God in of the Old Testament studies, this guy named Ortland said, when you read the Bible and read the scriptures about what marriage is supposed to be, it's supposed to be one single shared human experience. It's no longer what I want. It's no longer what I want to do. It's not about me. It's now about we. What are we going to do? What's happening to us? When my wife is sick, I'm sick. When my kids are struggling, I'm struggling. When they need wisdom, I'm going to share it with them. When they need me there, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be their social backbone. Not because I'm the only one who can do it, but because I'm supposed to be there. There are two things I want to close with on this. Two personal observations, perhaps application. I have 3 kids, been married 22 years. It's pretty good. My family, it's like eternity, my side of the family. I have the longest running marriage in my family. But I've learned as a husband and as a father, I may have my own goals and aspirations, selfish things, which in one sense are perfectly legitimate. I want to have a good job. I want to have good education. I want to be good at it. I want to be successful. All of us have individual goals that are healthily self-centered. But I would rather lose sleep by displacing the things I want to do to later so that I can be present with my wife and my children. Because they're first. I'd rather do, if I had to, if I'm forced to, if I'm put in a position where it's necessary, I'd rather lose sleep. Because I'd rather be at the game where my kid's playing. I'd rather be at the performance where my kid's at. I want to be there at dinner time. Excuse me. Whatever it is. And sometimes my personal work is heavy. As a preacher, you just can't get around that. A preacher tends to speak twice a week on Sundays, if not 3 times on Sundays. 3 times on Sundays for 52 weeks. It's a lot of talking. There's a lot of lessons to prepare for. And they're not all easy. Some of them take a lot of time to read and research. You add extra curriculars to it. You have a pretty heavy load. But I'd rather lose sleep so that I can be there for my kid, there for my wife. So if, like, for whatever reason, our money has gone a little dry, a little low, she's not stressing by herself. If for whatever reason my kids are struggling through homework and I might happen to know how to answer a particular question, I'm there. Am I good at it? Am I perfect at it? No. It's a rough balance. But we kind of signed up for it when we decided to have children. We kind of signed up for that when we decided to have a spouse. And we may not have signed up to exist, but we do exist, and we have to choose how we're going to live and how we're going to serve and how we're going to influence. What will our presence be? Finally, in the personal point, sorry. I've learned to lose immediate success so that I can be present in the lives of people I care about and are helping. It's kind of the flip side of what I just said. You might even say it's the same thing said over. You're probably right. But I think saying it this way, I had to learn to lose immediate success for myself so I can be present. Saying it that way shows that it's not necessarily a given. You know, Jesus taught us that what good is it that you gain the whole world but lose your soul? Perhaps in that, or on parity to it, what good is it if we're successful in all of our ventures? If you lose your wife and lose your children, what have you accomplished then? All you've accomplished is to bring your presence and influence and create more problems. They're not insurmountable. It's not always going to be easy. Loss of sleep, comes with health problems. And can come with a lot of lonely nights. And if you work so hard, you're never around your spouse. All the while, if we're not even paying attention, we can become and create in our minds a sense of victimhood. I'm working for my family. I'm doing this and providing. I'm fill in the blank. You're providing, but no one asked you to leave us. If we're going to be people that influence, and I'm not saying there are not times when we have to take certain jobs for a while that pull us away. I'm not talking about that. The tendency is our children and our spouses will understand. But when that's your entire approach to work or success, you give up your children, you give up those important times, you give up the influence that you have to lead them in the right way. Do not be surprised that they will find other influences that care about them. Sorry. So, apparently, my throat doesn't want to let me talk anymore. So, we're going to close it there. One last point as we close. There's a reason why the gang culture works. Because when I used to run the streets, many of us had both parents, but they worked. They worked a lot. They were often immigrant workers, so they worked multiple shifts. So guess who's home alone? Children. teenagers. And guess what happens when you're out there? You're lonely. The streets have plenty of mentors. Plenty of people that need runners for drug money or whatever. Plenty of people that will show you support if you get in trouble. Plenty of people that will create a artificial family for you of influence and people you can rely on, depend on. The reason why gang culture works so well is because it actually does the things of support, of culture creating, of loyalty. When you find 20 people that say they'll die for you, and you're constantly testing that every day, the influence of that presence is powerful. What would happen if our parents, if we as parents, as we as spouses, showed that to our children every day? Don't worry about those people out there. I'm here. I'm right here with you. I would rather lose 1,000 jobs than lose you. That's the power of presence. And we see this in God. God is not sat by to watch us fail and flail about in our sins, unable to accomplish the impossible, to be right with God alone. God entered into our time and into our space, into our skin, to show us the way, to be with us, to raise up what the church is, that we might become qualified or appropriately sanctified to be with God. He got involved. The Word became flesh, the God-man Jesus, that we can have access to the Heavenly Father and have a hope in heaven. If we're going to follow Him, it can't just be in what He teaches. It has to be also in how He shows His presence and what it means for us. With that, the lesson's yours.
All right. Any questions from you all? Okay. So you made reference to that survey talking about influence. Did it happen to say specifically why, any specifics about why fathers are more influential?
The question, your mic's not on.
So you made reference in your lesson to the survey that indicates that fathers have greater influence over than mothers.
Yeah.
Did it give any specifics as to why?
One of the reasons that was listed that I remember is the broad dynamic of strength that a father brings to a household. So it's not that women are not strong. So it's not saying, it wasn't like throwing shade on women, but it was that there is a stronger sense of safety, a stronger stabilizing influence of the father.
Excellent. Okay. Also, you were talking about intentionally versus unintentionally being of influence. Any advice about how fathers can be intentionally positive when too often fathers can just default to being negative, that their influence is just kind of like, I'm showing up to tell you you're in trouble or something?
Right. So it has to, okay, so let me back up. Let me say this in two contexts. So in a context dealing with a couple, right? And then there's the context of kind of the loner dad. Okay. I think in a context of marriage or when people are living together, one of the things that happens is the dad gets defaulted to being the disciplinarian. And unfortunately, because that happens more often than not, men tend to get the bad rep of either overdoing it, right, or under-delivering punishment. Right, so we have this dynamic, right? So before I answer that question, I just want to say there's some men who under-deliver because they're constantly being asked to be the disciplinarian, and there's others that are like, I'm sick of being the disciplinarian. But I think when we approach this question, one of the things that I try to do personally is take a moment to breathe and make sure I have already a philosophy. I already had a philosophy of how I was going to treat my kids before I had kids. In other words, I knew that, okay, if they do something wrong, I will punish them, but it's not going to be knee-jerk reactions. And I'm going to accept that there might be a delay in punishment, but for purpose. And I think that step is like a filter. If you take a moment and go, this kid blew up a microwave, or this kid exploded hard-boiled eggs in the pot, and they're on the ceiling, or none of these have happened to my children, I have done these things myself. But what I'm saying is, you have to go in there and go, all right, discipline has a goal, and it's not to cripple. Hebrews chapter 10 tells us that even God gives discipline, but it's not to make the person who's wounded crippled. Too many times we go into our children's rooms or whatever to cripple them. No, I mean, emotionally, that might be a little harsh. But I've seen a
Figuratively speaking.
Figuratively speaking, yeah. Figuratively speaking. But I think, and we may not do it intentionally, because we might think, well, discipline must be discipline.
Right.
You know? So I think we need to have a healthy moment to go, what happened? Tell me what happened. This is what I know. I'm disappointed. And figure out how you're going to approach that. That might seem like unsatisfying. Discipline is not supposed to satisfy us. It's not an emotional satisfying moment. And so if we're impatient, we turn it into it. So that would be the first thing I'd say. Got to break away from this issue of immediate punishment. But in places where it's a single dad, you know, he's got to carry both hands, right? The emotional side of it and the disciplinary side of it. And this is where I think that survey kind of points to that dads, I don't want to imply anything negative about women, but men tend to have a cooler head. Tendency, not in every case. And so that seems to play out there. So probably say the same thing there. But there'll be a likelihood of a calmer kind of disciplinary system.
All right. One last question, then we'll wrap it up. You talked about TV and the influence being, you know, dads are either not important, not influential, not necessary, all the above. Are there other influences that may carry the same connotations or different connotations?
Like?
So TV is one source.
Right.
Are there other sources of, you know, coming into the home that are either shedding a positive light on fatherhood, additional negative light?
Yeah. Well, I mean, social media is a really powerful tool because you could take small clips and it just hits everyone gets it. Everyone's on the algorithm. Everyone's getting hit by the same idea, video. And the thing about social media is that you can say anything, but usually what tracks is the thing that people want to hear. So social media, you get hit by messages that may not even be accurate, but because it pulls in everyone's attention, that becomes the banner, thing across the thing. So people are going, what's on social media? 100 million people have just liked it or whatever, right? So you compound that with this idea that gender is fluid. You combine that with, men are historically, structurally oppressive of women. You combine that with women are, and this one I wouldn't disagree with, but probably across the board, women are typically the most vulnerable in society, historically. I don't think I can disagree with that. But that doesn't mean men aren't abused either. So, but the messaging of social media that all of our kids have, the majority of our kids have access to, they're constantly being hit with that. And in addition to that, as much as there's all this like Me Too movement and all that stuff going on, no one is really shutting down pornography. Right? No one's shutting that down. Me Too isn't shutting that down.
Right.
They'll shut down individuals, but they're not going to shut down like all these other websites that shoot off porn and everything. They're not going to do that. Or they haven't. It hasn't been their focus. So we have these tons of mixed messages. So what's a young man doing right now on social media? He's being told he's a part of the problem of all society since the day he was born.
Yeah.
Right? And here's the ironic part. But we're also being told he doesn't know that he's a man. Because we can't know what a woman is, or we can't know what a man is.
Right.
So that's affecting our children growing up. That's affecting how they view themselves, their value, and it's constantly bombarding. And yet, social media has tons of videos that are telling young boys, hey, look at me, look at me, look at me. So social media, definitely. And it erodes confidence of young men in men. So
with that, do you want to?
Yeah, with that, we'll close. Thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry that my voice, for some reason, just got really dried up real quick, but good questions. We're going to close right now. We're going to have lunch. We're going to come back at about, I think, 2 and have, well, you won't be here with us online, but we're going to have a man cave session that we do after lunch. And so for the streaming